Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. It's great to have you with us.
It is.
I'm James, this is Cathryn, if you haven't joined us, and we're on week 4 of the Book of Ruth.
My hand's going away. Yeah, we're really excited. We hope you're excited. Even if you've read it before, which we have lots of times, to come to it again and to read it fresh.
So where are we at?
So good.
So we leave Ruth 3 in tension. What was the tension?
Yeah, so the tension is Ruth has gone to Boaz, as Naomi suggested, and basically asked him if he will be their kinsman redeemer. So well, that means he will pay to redeem the land that belonged to Naomi's husband Elimelech, and he will marry Ruth, and so the family. That
was the responsibility of people who are
so
in the extended family.
Older people, older men within their much wider family network who could afford to sort of pay to redeem, but would do that, and as a protection for the family line as well. But Boaz says to her, I absolutely will, but there's another relative who's closer, and so they need to be asked if they want to do it first, because they have, sort of the first right to do that. And if they don't, then I will. But he sends her back to Naomi with her shawl full of grain, so she goes back full, even though he hasn't got an answer for her over the bigger question of redemption yet. But he wants to send her back to Naomi full. And so she goes back, and Naomi says, right, we can trust Boaz. We've seen his character. We know what he's like. We can trust him. We know that he'll sort it out today. And so we leave them waiting, and now we see what Boaz will do. So we get to chapter 4.
Great. And then we have, as it goes, meanwhile Boaz went to the town. So this is basically following on straight from the...
Yeah, he went to the town gate.
Yeah, went to the town gate. So meanwhile Boaz went to the town gate and sat down there, just as the garden redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. So the town gate was this. It was almost like the town hall. It was the bit between the outside of the city and the inside of the city.
If you wanted to meet someone, if you wanted to do a business transaction, if you wanted to sort out a dispute, you went to the town gate, and the town elders would be, close by, or lots of them would have been around, so they could be called upon to witness things or to help sort out a problem, or that kind of thing. So it's the place to go if you want to sort something out. So the other kinsman redeemer, who's the closer relative, comes along, and Boaz invites him to sit down, and then he asks some of the elders of the town to come and sit with them, because he wants witnesses and he wants it to be all legal.
And just as a side thing in terms of an elder, so the word elder is derived from the word beard.
Yeah.
Which is to do with...
They would have been...
Older men.
The wisdom and the experience
that kind of tickled me when I realised that actually it was to do with beards.
It was to do with beards.
So
that's
think
just
of
a little tidbit for you there.
These elders are all going to be...
The original Hebrew.
Full of beards.
So they've come, and Boaz says to the closer kinsman redeemer, Naomi, who's come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so, but if you will not, tell me, so that I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I'm the next in line. And then the kinsman redeemer says, it's like, great, I'll do it. The land sounds fabulous, but of course Boaz hasn't
given him the whole story.
Yeah, he hasn't given him the whole story. So then he goes on to say to him, in addition, after the guy said, I'll redeem the land, he says, on the day that you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. So Mahlon would have inherited Elimelech's land, but obviously Mahlon has passed away as well, and his widow is Ruth. And so then the kinsman redeemer says, then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot.
And the issue was to do with if Ruth had a son, and the kinsman redeemer had lost his son,
other sons, or
then Ruth's son
would inherit everything from her
estate,
from Elimelech's line, but also from the kinsman redeemers as well. So
he wasn't willing to go for that risk.
He wasn't willing to risk his own land and his own property going to another family line. And then we get this great thing of the shoe. So he says, I'm not going to do it. So he's the closer relative, but he says, I'm not going to do it. The land, yes, fine, but I'm not risking my family line, so I don't want to do it. So in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property, so if you're doing a property deal, if you're buying a house, then one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other.
And the idea behind that was the fact that it was signifying taking your foot off the land that you owned.
Or that you had a right to.
Yeah, so you're taking your foot off that you were standing on, and you were placing your shoe on the other person's foot to demonstrate that it was now theirs for them to walk on.
So the kinsman redeemer who doesn't want to redeem the land takes his sandal off, effectively to say, I give up my right to this land, to redeem the land, and I do it in front of the elders, and I give it to you, Boaz, because now I pass the right to you, and you have the right to do it.
And although Boaz took in, there were 10 elders there. It says of elders, so that also suggests there were more elders than just 10.
Yeah. But then he says in front of the elders and all the people who would have been around, been lots of people around the town gate, and he says, you are witnesses that I've bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion and Mahlon, and I've also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses. And we just see this beautiful thing that Boaz is doing. He is redeeming Naomi's life, he's redeeming Ruth's life, but he's also redeeming this family. It's not just these individuals, it's the family, and it's the family property, and it's the family line, to say, this needs to continue, and I give what I can, to make that happen. And he says, today you are witnesses. And then we have this beautiful blessing, and we've talked about blessing all the way through. Naomi blesses in the midst of her trauma, and Boaz blesses and out of his wealth of generosity, but also because of his relationship with God. And then we get the elders and those at the gate, and they bless. Do you want to take us through the blessing?
So the blessing is it's 3 parts. You have a fruitful part that it's about fruitfulness, being built up in the family of Israel, and then you have the blessing of respect in their community. May you have standing, and then you have another blessing of
any
respect as well. In terms of the fact of it's linked to Perez, who was the guardian redeemer of Tamar, and as a result of that line of Judah became very prominent.
So Perez redeemed Tamar, and then they had a son, Judah, and Judah is one of Boaz's ancestors, and it's the blessing of fruitfulness for the house of Israel, blessing on Boaz of standing and fame in Bethlehem, and then blessing of the wider family of Israel of blessing. So it says, through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah. And so you get this huge blessing that they had no idea what God was going to do with, and Ruth and Boaz would have had no idea what God was going to do, what God had planned, and yet the town elders beautifully bless this act of redemption. They see the beautiful redemption that Boaz is doing, and of course this is playing out a much bigger story of redemption for Israel, and then the much bigger story of where Jesus comes and redeems us, because we can't pay the debt. We need to be released from the debt, and in that way Boaz redeems Ruth and Naomi and redeems their family line, and Jesus redeems us when he dies and takes our sin. So we get this beautiful kind of mirroring from this just very personal story then into the story of Israel and God's people, and then into the whole story of God's redemption of us and humanity for himself through Jesus.
And then we come to the conclusion where Boaz takes Ruth becomes pregnant, and then Ruth has a child, and the child is held by a son, and is held by Naomi, and the women say to Naomi, praise be to the Lord.
Yeah, so same women who were all like twitty when Naomi came back, and they were like, oh, Naomi's lost everything, oh dear, how terrible, blah, blah. So they all come back and they're there and they bless again, don't they?
They say, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian and redeemer. May he come famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better than 7 sons, has given him birth. And the thing that stands out for that is actually a couple of things. So the first one is that the conclusion is very, very similar to the introduction. In fact, in Hebrew, the structure of it is exactly the same. The number of words are the same as in the introduction.
It's amazing, isn't it?
The way that it compresses a lot of stuff in a short period of short space. The way that they both focus on Naomi. and not don't really have any comment on Ruth so much in this. And then also the fact that the introduction is focusing on Naomi's emptiness, and yet here it's focusing very much on Naomi's fullness and what she's achieved,
and the hope for the future, because there's a son, and so that's the hope for the future in the family line.
The one comment that is interesting, because they say about the fact that that Ruth is better than 7 sons.
Yeah.
So in the scriptures, when you're talking about 7 is a complete number.
Yes.
So having 7 sons
perfection.
Was amazing.
Yeah.
And some of that was because the mortality rate was 35%. So the more sons you had, the more likely your family line was going to continue. But actually, in terms of the number, as it being a perfection, this is somebody who is extremely amazing.
Yes, it's the imagery of what Ruth has done in staying.
Jesus uses it when he says you must forgive 7 times 7.
Yeah, but it's because of Ruth's faithfulness to Naomi. If Ruth had gone back to Moab and not been faithful to Naomi, then none of this would have happened. There would have been no redemption. There would have been no fullness for Naomi, and so it's just beautiful. So they're saying, she's better than perfection, than what we could have imagined. And then Naomi takes the child, lays him in her lap, and cares for him. And the women living there said, Naomi has a son, because Naomi had lost everything and had no hope for the future because she didn't have her sons anymore. And so now she doesn't have a son, but she has a grandson. But it's like Naomi has a son again. She has hope for the future. And they named him Obed,
which means servant. And if you were to extend that to Obadiah, then that is the servant of the Lord.
Yeah. And Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David, who of course we know King David and Goliath, who was Israel's.
And then
you
have that line of like you were saying, the emptiness and the restlessness of
Judges and
then leading into the life of David, which then becomes the rest. And it's like Naomi's life, the restlessness of not having anything and it all going, to now coming into a place of rest with Boaz and Ruth.
Yeah,
it's an
and
amazing
again, the hope for the future, which is just amazing, isn't it?
So what comes out of this for you? What stood out for you?
I think I just love again how I think I've probably said it before, but this sense of where Naomi and Ruth and Boaz are living their lives. They have not got a thought to a bigger picture. They are living their lives, but they're doing it. They're living for God. They're living His way, the way that He has said to live, and His laws and His customs. And they're doing it with integrity. So they're following God, and they're choosing to treat one another, faithfully and with integrity. And so they're playing out this story of their lives, and with generosity, with blessing, with just immense faithfulness and courage from Ruth. And they have this beautiful redemption, and the redemption from Ruth of having a son, and all of those things, security and all of those things, and that Boaz is being blessed as well. They're saying bless Boaz, may he have standing, may he have fame in the area, and that kind of thing, because of his beautiful act of redemption. And yet, because we can read this and we know, from before and after, we see that God was doing so much more within this story, because their son Obed is the father of Jesse, and Jesse is the father of David, and David obviously is what's the word? I can't think of the word. He's an ancestor. He's in the line of Jesus. I suddenly lost all words then. So we know that Jesus was in the line of David, and so you have this beautiful story of redemption that's going on such a small scale, and yet it's telling us a bigger story about the redemption of Israel, and then it's telling us a bigger story about God's plan for redemption for all of us, and freedom from sin through Jesus. And that this story is so key to God's plan, but it was a story of individuals. It was a story of them living their lives. And I just think, we can be making choices and choosing to live God's way, and being faithful to Him, and living with integrity according to the way that He asks us to, and being faithful to one another in the way that we deal with one another. And we can feel like they're just small things that we're doing, every day. Or maybe they feel really big to us, but we feel like in the grand scheme of things, they're not. and yet we just have no idea what beautiful things God is going to do with our faithfulness to him and our faithfulness to one another, and where we choose to be faithful and to live with integrity according to God's law, and that we can trust God to do so much more with just our choosing to live our lives for him and his way than we can ever imagine. These guys could never have in a million years probably imagined what God was going to do through their faithfulness and through their choosing to follow him, and I just find that really exciting. How about you?
So for me, that's interesting. Yeah, so for me, I had a number of ones actually. So the first one was the character of Boaz, and just as somebody to aspire to, really, the way that he had so much integrity, the way that his character and generosity, and the fact that he was always willing to give of himself and to give what he had, and not putting himself first. The second was a line in verse 10. I've also acquired Ruth the Moabite as my wife in order to maintain the name of the deed of his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. And it's like, I was thinking, gosh, what a statement, that his name will not disappear from among his family or his hometown. And I think, how much we live in a very individual, family-based thing. We don't really know very much about what's gone on in our past, because we don't have many stories that are passed down, or we choose not to pass those stories down. And I think, I wonder what events have taken part in our background, in our ancestors, in the generations that have enabled us to be where we are now. It may be that somebody's made a sacrifice to travel from one country to another country, or they've ended up choosing a job that was less so they could spend more time at home, or there's so many different things.
Again, those acts of faithfulness, and choosing to live God's way, and how that has had an impact on where we are now as a country, and where we are, the good and the bad.
And I think even thinking about looking forward in terms of, I find it fascinating that there's a prayer that the family would be famous.
Yeah.
When do you ever pray that? In our day and age, it's almost like, I'm not sure I want fame.
Well,
but because of, is it because that there was so much going for Boaz and Ruth, that their character was so strong that actually you would want them to be famous, because what an effect, if you've got somebody with that quality character, then that's going to have such an impact on the world.
And there's so much here in the story of the detail that obviously they were famous. People told their story of this act of redemption that Boaz had done, and this act of faithfulness of Ruth, that people told the story, because this was probably written much later when David was king, and yet they were famous for their faithfulness to God and their faithfulness in dealing with one another. And I just think that's so beautiful that they're putting family first, the way that God had designed things.
And would that affect how we make decisions? If we, there was a thought that actually there is a potential for the actions that I do today could influence what happens down the line in terms of 3 generations, 4 generations, 5 generations. An act of kindness to a person, or decisions that I make.
And I think that's really exciting, isn't it? But I don't know that in this sense that's necessarily what they were thinking.
No,
they
not
were
at all.
thinking about the family line, but they were just really acting to do life the way that God had asked them to, and to be faithful, and to live faithfully.
God was faithful to them.
And God was faithful to them.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We will, over the next couple of weeks, there's something coming up next week which could be slightly different, and then
will be slightly different.
And then then we're going into Christmas. Can you believe that? I can't believe we're going to Christmas. And so we will set out some bits and pieces going in towards there. But we hope you have a really good week, and we may see you next week. If not, we will see you the following week. Bye.
Bye.
Hi guys, it's so good to have you this morning, whether it be on Facebook or on Zoom. We are Helmond Vineyard Church, and we're just doing life together as we follow Jesus. If you want to be part of that journey, then feel free to come and join us, whether it be on Zoom, again on Facebook next week, or drop us a line and have a conversation with us. We'd love to hear from you. Another place you can find out what's going on would be to check out our website, which is www.hemelvineyard.org.uk. I pray this week that you would know Jesus' love and his presence with you in whatever you face. See you next week. Bye.